What if I told you there is a region along Idaho and eastern Washington where children, hunters, ranchers, workers, and even experienced outdoorsmen have vanished in ways that seem to follow a pattern, but the pattern only becomes disturbing when you wait until the end and see how often the same details repeat. At first, these cases look unrelated. An 18-month-old boy supposedly carried by a bear, a 7-year-old who disappears near a mining claim, a 17-year-old hunter lost in the Blue Mountains, a 14-year-old Boy Scout who vanishes in a snowstorm, a 2-year-old who disappears from a farm, and several women who vanish near roads, rivers, power stations, and rural properties. But beneath these separate stories, one question keeps returning. Why do so many of these people disappear near creeks, camps, roads, farms, and familiar places, only for searchers to find almost nothing? The first case takes us back to 1883 in Gentile Valley, Idaho, where 18-month-old James Vaughan disappeared while his mother was working near the family home. She searched immediately but could not find him. Soon, neighbors and local men joined the search. Some found tracks they believed were from a large bear and followed them through rough country, assuming the animal had taken the child. Hours later, the searchers found James alive, curled up in a brushy area, sleeping with his torn dress over his head, his shoes off, and only a small scratch on his foot. The story at the time became sensational. A bear had supposedly carried him for miles through valleys, over ridges, and through thick brush. But the author raises a serious problem. If a bear had carried a small child in its mouth, why were there no bite marks, deep injuries, bruises, or clear signs of an attack? Why would the child's clothes be torn, but his body almost unharmed? And how did an 18-month-old end up so far away without obvious trauma? This opening case creates the first loop of curiosity. If the bear explanation does not work, what actually happened to James Vaughan? Decades later, in 1933, 7-year-old Frank Lobears disappeared in Chamberlain Basin, Idaho, near his father's mining claims. He had gone to visit another mining site and was expected to return, but he never arrived. Searchers from both mines began looking immediately, and they found tracks that suggested Frank had removed his snowshoes. Then the trail seemed to lead into harder ground, and searchers lost it. An enormous search followed, covering miles of difficult terrain, but no trace of Frank was found. The area contained creeks and rugged wilderness, and the chapter reminds us of a detail that will return again and again. Many missing people in these stories are found in or near creek beds, or connected in some way to water. Then comes Donald McDonald, a 17-year-old who disappeared in 1949 while hunting elk in the Blue Mountains near Black Snake Ridge in southeastern Washington. Donald and his friend Jack Farquharson were experienced hunters, and Donald shot a bull elk during the trip. Jack tracked the animal and later returned, but Donald was gone. Searchers found no rifle, no clothing, no body, and no clear trace. Heavy snow soon covered the region, and after days of searching, the effort was abandoned. Years later, another case in the same mountains would mirror Donald's disappearance in a disturbing way. That case was Bobby Boatman, a 14-year-old Boy Scout who disappeared in 1951 near Godman Spring, also in the Blue Mountains. Bobby and two friends went camping, and after he disappeared, searchers faced brutal winter weather, deep snow, and almost impossible conditions. A week-long search failed to find him. Then, years later, hunters found items believed to be connected to Bobby: a rifle, a red cap, a knife, a sheath, and rope. The rifle and cap were found near where searchers believed Bobby had been, while the knife, sheath, and rope were later found in a creek bed. Eventually, bones and clothing were discovered under tree roots, partially covered by dirt and debris. The author found this deeply suspicious. Why would someone bury a body under tree roots, but leave other items in a creek bed far away? Why would the rifle and cap be found where they were, while the knife and rope were elsewhere? And could Donald McDonald have met a similar fate nearby, only with his remains never recovered? This becomes the second curiosity loop. Are these mountain disappearances accidents, or are some scenes being disturbed, staged, or misunderstood years later? In 1953, Catherine Painter Maynard disappeared near White Bird, Idaho, while running a cattle ranch near the edge of the Nez Perce National Forest. Catherine was not a typical city visitor. She was used to rural life, worked on the ranch, and had gone looking for missing cattle. Snow began falling, and when she did not return, searchers began looking for her. Her pony was later found tied to a tree miles from her body, and Catherine was found wearing felt boots over her overshoes. Reports said she had removed both overshoes and one of the felt boots before collapsing in the snow, and the cause of death was listed as exhaustion. But why would an experienced ranch woman leave her pony tied up, continue on foot, and remove protective footwear in winter conditions? Why would she travel so far through difficult country without the animal she had been riding? The chapter does not give a simple answer. Then, in 1966, 2-year-old Christine Wollett disappeared in Spokane, Washington, after being allowed outside while her parents were home. She was last seen near the yard, and after she vanished, searchers combed the river, nearby areas, and surrounding wilderness. Then strange sounds were reported. One searcher said he heard what sounded like a child crying from the darkness, and another later reported hearing a moan from what sounded like a child in a desolate hillside area. But despite searching those places, no evidence of Christine was found. Officials later suggested she may have drowned, but the author questions how the search could shift from possible abduction to river drowning to unexplained sounds in the woods, without producing a single solid clue. If those sounds were Christine, why was she never located? And if they were not, what were searchers hearing? In 1968, Lowell Smith, a former Green Bay Packers football player and experienced outdoorsman, disappeared near Pilot Knob in Idaho. Lowell had traveled to a remote area connected to the Nez Perce National Forest. He set up camp, and evidence later suggested he had been there for at least 2 days. But when searchers arrived, they found his camp, food, ammunition, rifle, and personal items still there. His rifle was in the immediate area, which the author found highly unusual because a hunter in that region would almost never leave camp without a rifle. A massive search followed, involving helicopters, National Guard members, bloodhounds, and ground teams, but Lowell was never found. The question is simple and chilling. If Lowell did not leave voluntarily, what forced him away from camp so suddenly that he left behind the one item he would likely never abandon? The chapter then moves into several cases involving women in rural Idaho and eastern Washington. Gayla Christine Shaper disappeared in 1979 near Moscow, Idaho, after being dropped off at a pasture. She never returned, and although a suspect was considered and questioned, no arrest was made. Julie and Weflin disappeared in 1987 while working alone at a Bonneville Power Authority substation near Spokane. She was an employee responsible for reading meters and maintaining equipment. She signed in, then vanished roughly an hour later. Investigators found drag marks near her vehicle, signs that something had happened, and later located personal items such as her hard hat and sunglasses. Authorities believe she was overpowered by someone, and the FBI entered the case. Julie's disappearance is one of the clearest possible abduction cases in this chapter, but even here, no body was ever found. Tina Marie Finley disappeared in 1988 near Plummer, Idaho, after being dropped off near a residence during a rainy night. Her purse, ID, and shoes were later found on the side of the road, and other belongings were found in an abandoned house miles away. Her friend passed a polygraph and was not considered a suspect, but Tina was never found. Again, the same details return: shoes left behind, rural roads, scattered belongings, and no final answer. Then comes one of the most haunting Idaho cases: Richard Ray Barnett, known as Ricky, a 2-year-old boy who disappeared in 1982 from his grandparents' dairy farm near Grangeville. Ricky had been on the farm with his grandparents, then vanished during the morning while people were working nearby. Hundreds of people joined the search, including family, neighbors, church members, and law enforcement. A small child's apple was found in a creek, and a dog tracked a scent to a fence line before stopping. A psychic later claimed the grandmother had given Ricky away, but she passed a polygraph and was cleared. The sheriff eventually admitted that if he had a trace, he would keep going, but after days of searching there was no clue, nothing. Ricky was never found. This case becomes part of an even more disturbing pattern because two other 2-year-old boys, Reuben Felix and Avery Blakely, disappeared from rural areas under similar conditions. Reuben Felix vanished in 1997 from a family ranch near Shoshone, Idaho, after being briefly left by his father while drinking from a bottle. Officials initially wondered whether he had drowned in the river, while others considered abduction, but no evidence proved either theory. Avery Barnett Blakely vanished in 2009 near Malden, Washington, after his mother briefly left him alone in a yard while helping her sister move. He disappeared within minutes. Searchers believed he may have fallen into Pine Creek, but divers and fast-water teams found no body. Only slippers were found near the creek. The chapter summary highlights the eerie similarity. 3 2-year-old boys from rural areas vanish across decades, often near farms or creeks, with limited evidence and no recovered body. Are these tragic accidents, or are investigators missing a repeated pattern because the cases are separated by years? The chapter also includes Ronald S. Gray, a 62-year-old retired police officer and experienced hunter who disappeared in 2008 in the Nez Perce National Forest. Ronald had survived Vietnam, knew the outdoors, and had hunted the area before. During a guided hunting trip, he separated from the guide briefly, and when the guide returned, Ronald was gone. One of the largest searches in the region's history followed. Helicopters, horses, ground teams, and even law enforcement from Massachusetts helped search. The area was enormous, and after days of effort, no trace of Ronald or his gear was found. No body, no equipment, no final sign. Once again, the wilderness seemed to erase a man who should have known how to survive. Brian Sines disappeared in 1991 near Clarkia, Idaho, while hunting after work. Searchers found his truck parked on a Forest Service road, and snow had fallen. Dogs tracked a scent up a ridge, then stopped. Months later, a water measurement team found bones and pieces of clothing near the bottom of a ridgeline. Some remains and clothing were believed to belong to Brian, but the coroner reportedly made a bold claim that he had died of exposure. The author questions that conclusion because Brian was only miles from his truck, familiar with the area, and his remains appeared scattered across the ridge. Did he fall? Did animals move the bones? Did he die elsewhere and end up there later? The evidence did not settle the question. By the end of the chapter, Idaho and eastern Washington reveal a deeply unsettling pattern. Children disappear from farms, yards, ranches, and rural homes. Hunters vanish after short separations from partners. Personal belongings appear in creeks, under roots, along roads, or far from where they should be. Searchers hear sounds but find no source. Dogs track scents that suddenly stop. Some bodies are eventually found in strange conditions, while many are never recovered at all. And the most disturbing part is that some of these cases seem to repeat across decades. 2-year-old boys disappearing near rural homes, hunters vanishing from known areas, clothing and tools turning up in places that raise more questions than answers. Maybe every one of these cases has a normal explanation. Maybe James Vaughan really was carried by a bear and somehow survived. Maybe Frank Lobears simply became lost. Maybe Donald McDonald and Bobby Boatman died in the Blue Mountains. Maybe Catherine Maynard succumbed to exhaustion. Maybe Christine Willett drowned. Maybe Lowell Smith wandered away from camp. Maybe Julie Weflin and Tina Finley were victims of human crime. Maybe Ricky Barnett, Reuben Felix, and Avery Blakely each disappeared through separate tragic accidents. But when the same details repeat, creeks, missing shoes, abandoned gear, rural isolation, search dogs losing trails, children vanishing in moments, experienced adults leaving behind essential items. The easy explanations begin to feel incomplete. Idaho and eastern Washington do not need legends to become frightening. Their mountains, farms, forests, and back roads already hold enough unanswered questions. And maybe that is the real mystery. Not just that people disappear in these places, but that when they do, the evidence often seems to point in every direction at once, until all that remains is silence.